Alright everyone, for some time now, the morality police have largely been leftists, trying to dumb down political discourse, because they don't want to debate you because they can't, because they suck. Communists don't have any talking points that work, and so they try to silence others, either through physical interaction. They try to attack people with bike locks oftentimes, or cement milkshakes or something, or they try to censor them using billionaire corporations, which is really funny. Anyway, you can't forget that the morality police also exist in the moral sense on the right. Because they do. Like, you think of, like, the Housewives of America thing. Yes, Tipper Gore may have been supposedly a liberal housewife, but a lot of her compatriots were, Republicans or Christian. Certainly the evangelo-cons, like a Pat Robertson and other fucking scumbags like him. People like that are scum. They are human scum. They're human waste. They've always been human waste. They grift off of creating controversy out of nothing. So Jim Banks, who is the central focus of this video, is a congressman, Republican, from Indiana's 3rd District. I think he's been in the Senate there at the state level as well. I'm not sure. I'm sure you probably don't know who he is because he's inconsequential, because he's a representative from Indiana. No offense to people from Indiana, but not necessarily the most noteworthy position that one can hold. He's on a spiel, like on fucking Twitter. He's like incoherently rambling about porn. It's destroying families, it destroys lives, and saying stupid shit. And the only reason I know about this is because Gab was retweeting him and pretending like this was number one, enforceable, and number two, a good thing. It's funny because Gab on any given day disclaims the use of state power to enforce morality, but then cheers somebody on for encouraging that very behavior. Free speech platform. I thought that was fairly self-explanatory. Apparently that doesn't extend to porn, even though repeatedly for decades and decades pornography has been construed as speech. Let me explain to this individual in Congress, which if you don't understand the Constitution, you shouldn't be in Congress. I'm sorry, but if you're that fucking ignorant that you should hold a recall vote, get rid of this moron before he makes an embarrassment of Indiana. It's sad. I'm sitting here, I'm a fucking a YouTube political analyst. I know more about the Constitution than a sitting congressman. It shouldn't be that way. You'd think that the best and brightest should be leading things. Unfortunately, it's usually the most fucking dull and dumb. Anyway, porn is speech. How can porn be speech? It's not saying anything. Well, in the context of a porn video, you might be. Here's the problem. If you construe the First Amendment as only involving speech in the sense of speaking to somebody in the most literal sense, if you take the literal approach to it, photography of any kind wouldn't be covered. Movies would have nothing to do with speech. Songs, music could be regulated up the ass. Pretty much any physical medium other than interactive speech. The thing is, the spirit of the First Amendment, keep in mind the premise of why the Constitution was created. The purpose, the meaning of the founders, the goals that they had in mind have been used in legal decisions. The whole reason for the First Amendment had nothing specifically to do with the British government deciding that two people in their own home could not say what they wanted to one another. It primarily extended further than that to public discourse. When you are putting art out there, for example, the idea that you can censor art because it's not speech and therefore it doesn't matter, the government can do whatever it wants, has been repeatedly rejected by the Supreme Court and every federal court that's ever weighed in. Obscenity is speech. It doesn't have to be verbal in this sense. It's like the idea of the press. The right of the press doesn't stop and end where the press pass ends. It goes beyond that. The press involves the publishing industry. It involves this. It involves online material, and it's been construed that way. Publishers versus platforms aside. Pornography has to be considered a form of speech. It's explicitly protected. I would go further and say the Fourth Amendment explicitly protects the rights of individuals to record themselves in sexual interactions. The federal government, moreover, has no right to regulate this at all because of the supremacy of the states under the 10th Amendment. Unless are you sending these porn stars across state lines? And by the way, this brings up this particular Fourth Amendment issue. What if a private couple were to make porn? They're not being paid or anything like that. They're just recording themselves fucking, and they throw it on the internet, on their own personal website or something. They find it amusing. Would you expect the federal government to step in and say this is obscene, you can't do that, shut their website down? Well, the idea of Gab arguing for that, number one, is hilarious. The idea of the hypocrisy involved also is funny, because if you've got Torbar, one of these people, saying, no, we're just saying that culture should stomp it out by choosing not to interact with porn. We decry the existence of it and think it's bad. Okay, it's fine, you can believe that morally. But you're cheering on a congressman for saying that obscenity laws should be enforced. They're not being enforced because they're not constitutional. Dude, laws are passed all the time. They're called blue laws. They're passed, but they're not able to be enforced. There are laws, for example, in the state of Vermont, famous old blue law. You can find it in compilations. You're not allowed to paint a horse in the state of Vermont. It dates back to a time in which Native Americans would paint their horses, and people were afraid of being raided or whatever. I guess they might have been afraid that some person who wasn't a so-called Native American would paint their horse and, you know, attack their neighbor, and people would think it was Indians instead of the neighbor killing them or something. It's unenforceable. If you choose to paint a number on your horse, are the state police going to show up and arrest you? No. What are you fucking talking about? The federal government has no actual right to legislate such a thing. There's no right given to a governing body to be able to tell you, no, you can't do something that's totally not victimizing your horse for some agricultural purpose. You know, you needed numbers on them so you didn't forget their names or something while you got used to your fucking new flock or whatever. You can do that. There are blue laws on the books in pretty much every state and municipality in the U.S. Laws that are unconstitutional or otherwise unlawful that are still there on the books. They simply can't be enforced. It is the right of the federal government to back off and say, whoa, we think we're going to get sued and have to shell out through the ass, so we're not going to enforce this law. Happens all the time. The fact is that if it were to try to enforce it, it would just lead to more court cases. It's unenforceable. No court in the land would enforce them. A court's not going to sign off on an order saying you have to shut your website down because you spun your cock around on this animated image. It's never going to happen. It is legal. I'd point out, porn is allowed on Twitter. The irony is that if you were to go to this representative's thread on Twitter and post nudes there, it would be allowed under Twitter's guidelines. I, by the way, have no problem with this. Now, some people, both this representative and Gab, others, well, children might be exposed to porn. And their handle use the thing, well, children can't go buy cigarettes, they can't go buy alcohol, but they can obtain porn. Children can't go buy cigarettes, but they can get cigarettes from their parents. They can't buy beer, but if there's beer in the fridge, they can grab a beer. It's up to the parents to determine that. It's up to the parents to prevent that from happening by saying, hey, Jimmy, don't fucking steal my beer. You'll get a spanking. Hey, Jimmy, don't smoke. It's bad for you. You get lung cancer. Please don't steal my Marbs. It's up to the parents. The federal government can't, though, say, you've got kids under 18, you're not allowed to smoke in your home. That would be the true equivalent. They made an apples to oranges comparison there. Porn is explicitly protected by the First and Fourth Amendments. No exceptions, no ifs, ands, or buts. If it involves consenting adults putting out that material, and they've got a warning saying you must be 18 to fucking look at this shit, it's perfectly fine. Obscenity laws are unenforced for a very good reason. This representative apparently is living in the 90s and doesn't understand that. It's sad that we have so many boomers in Congress who don't comprehend the Constitution. They don't care about it. They don't care about the Constitution as long as their corporate buddies get a little bit more corporate welfare. And this was like, oh, Trump made a promise that he'd start enforcing these laws. There's a reason why he hasn't bothered to proceed with that. For the same reason that he backed off on his unconstitutional vaping ban proposals. Because it's dumb. And so are you. That's about all. Peace out.